The sound of leaves crunched under the weight of our feet as we walked down Sycamore Avenue towards the old Trapper Museum. It was 11 o'clock at night, and it was dark, quiet, and cold with only the sound of rustling branches to keep us company. Leon was with me, my best friend from school. "You don't think it's real, do you?" Leon asked me. "No, of course not. What are you, 5?" I replied. It all started last week with a crazy old lady screaming at everyone outside a grocery store. She was telling people to stay far, far away from the Trappers Museum we were headed to now. That she had, get this, somehow trapped a ghost in a crystal jar. A really bad one, she kept on saying. When I passed her, she looked at me directly, fell to her knees and begged me to listen, that the old museum was haunted or evil or something. What she said stuck with me all week and I couldn't stop thinking about her. Well, finally, I decided to investigate her claims. I convinced Leon to come with me to check it out. He is a bit of a quirky kid, I tell you. He always wears shoes that old people wear, so everyone always calls him Granny Two Shoes. "So you don't believe in ghosts?" Leon asked me as we got closer. "Ghosts? No. Crazy old ladies? Even less," I said, shaking my head. "Think about what she said. A ghost in a jar? I mean, come on. She probably says crazy stuff like that for attention." "If you say so," Leon said, as his too old for him shoes squeaked like they were crying out for help. We rounded the corner of the street and there it was, the old Trappers Museum. A decrepit wooden sign stood at the foot of the property to announce its presence. The Fur Collective Outpost. It ran out of business years ago, and the only thing it was collecting now was dust. Apparently the museum housed a whole bunch of fur, animals, and traps that were used back in the 1800s to showcase the lifestyle and way of living people used to get by on way back then. Antique America, my mom said when I asked her about it. The property was gated, but the gate at the front was swinging open. Someone was definitely here before us, I thought. Leon looked scared. "What if someone is inside?" he asked. "The lights are out, no one's home. Come on," I beckoned. We swung open the gate and walked down the dirt path towards the museum. It was more of a house, really, from the looks of it, like someone had decided to open it up in their own home. Weeds were sprouting all over the place. It definitely was not well kept. There was a rusty padlock on the front door, but it was hanging loose like someone had hit it with a hammer. We looked at each other. "Probably just the crazy lady from the grocery store. No need to worry, she's not here anymore," I said. We went inside and the door slammed shut behind us, making us jump. Leon laughed nervously. "So much for a quiet entrance," he said. I took my phone out of my pocket and turned on its flashlight. "Whoa," I said. "Come on, let's look around." The air was dusty, like smelling the pages of an old book. There was a reception area by the front door with a cash register where people paid to enter. I flipped a quarter to the desk from the loose change in my pocket. A huge sign welcomed us in the next room, telling us about the history of the museum itself and the fur trade. I didn't stop to read it. A huge elk stared at us, with its mouth gaping open as if it was trying to tell us to run away. "Holy crap," I muttered. The room was filled with animals. Deer, elk, beavers, squirrels, raccoons, rabbits, groundhogs, and even a small freaking bear. All of them a band of brothers waiting to ambush us. They weren't alive, of course, but instead the lifeless, hollow bodies of taxidermy. It was still scary nonetheless in the dead of night. Dozens of black, glassy eyes staring at us everywhere we walked. Leon walked up to the elk and touched it. "Feels real," he said. "I bet PETA would have a field day with all of this." Ropes guided us to the next room, and I wasn't ready for what was there. Hundreds of animal pelts littered the room. Hundreds. They weren't neat and organized or put in display cases for us to look at. They were scattered in dozens of piles across the floor, stacking as high as 3 feet. Leon and I had to tiptoe around the room to avoid stepping on them. I shined my light onto the walls. "What in the world?" I yelped. There were pelts hammered into the walls with wooden pikes, creating cracks that splintered off in different directions. Next to the pelts were giant colored photos. Photos of animals being skinned alive and having their pelts torn off. Many of them were writhing in the air by metal hooks, dripping pools of blood beneath their bodies. Worst yet were the trappers in the photos who stood by their suffering prize, all smiles and glee. "Disgusting," I said, looking on in horror. Who would do this? And better yet, What kind of museum would show this to people? Over here, Leon said. Look at this. It was a series of photos of a bear who appeared to have all of his skin torn off except that of his head. It was still walking around with its mouth agape, and people were pointing and laughing at it. Leon turned away and lurched backwards, almost tripping over a pile of fur, making burping sounds. Think I'm gonna puke. Let's move on, he said. The museum ropes guided us upstairs to the second floor, and I could only hope that there weren't any more photos. In the back of my mind, though, I remembered the crazy old lady from the store and how she said this place was haunted. I started to believe her, and that made me all the more uneasy. What if there really was a ghost here that she had trapped? Some angry animal looking to take revenge? The steps squeaked, or maybe it was just Leon's stupid shoes. I couldn't tell. Come on, Granny Two Shoes, move faster. I pushed Leon from behind as he screamed at me not to call him that. The first room on the second floor was devoted to animal traps, snares, body grips, leg holds, cage traps, box traps, and, of course, bear traps that were thankfully closed. I stopped short in the second room, my mouth open. Almost all the wallpaper was torn from the walls there, like someone had been ripping out thick strips of it in angry strokes. Scratched on the surface underneath were very odd, very strange symbols and pictures. There were stick figure drawings of animals being killed in brutal ways. There were drawings of what looked like a strange, cloaked figure being praised by a dozen people. Other segments of the wall had giant eyes scratched onto it. Holy moly, Leon said. You don't think this was part of the original tour, do you? Doubted, I replied. Then again, not much about this museum screams family-friendly to me, so who knows? In the next room, I passed a series of cages meant for small animals and stopped short at the last one. The cage was surrounded by blood, and right next to it, a huge hunting knife. It all had to be fake, surely, but when I reached out and touched it, I felt its oily texture between my fingers. Leon, get over here, I yelled. When he was beside me, I tried wiping it on his shirt, but he jumped away. It's real blood, man. Damn, what the hell is in this cage? I wiped it on my jeans out of reflex next. Shit, man. Leon scratched his head. This is getting weird. First all those photos and pelts downstairs, the drawings on the walls, and now this? Maybe we should go. I don't see any ghosts or supernatural crystal jars around here. I bet that old lady's homeless and lives here, telling all sorts of crazy lies for attention. I told Leon to shush and pointed to the floor. There was a trail of blood leading down from the cage to another set of stairs in the far corner of the room. He shook his head, but I nodded. Slowly, we walked over to the stairs and I shined my flashlight up them. I don't hear anyone. Let's check it out, then we can go, I said. The stairs were really narrow, barely wide enough for even one person to walk up. At the top, I realized we were now in the attic. At its far end was a large glass window that let in the light of the moon. It was bright today, like a flashlight of its own, and lit up the room well enough for us to see. I stopped short. There, in the middle of the room, was a singular crystal jar. The trail of blood led straight to it. The blood was used to draw a circle around the jar in thick strokes. It was real blood, all right. That I was sure of now. The old coot wasn't lying, I said, stunned. Leon grabbed me and turned me around. Let's get out of here. This doesn't feel right. I shook my head. Not until we proved the lady was lying through her teeth. We're probably just on candid camera right now. The whole thing's a joke. I walked up to the circle of blood and stepped over it. I picked up the crystal jar and inspected it in the moonlight. It was heavier than I expected and thick too, with a slight bluish tint. The jar definitely looked like it was shaped from some crystal too. Quartz maybe, I didn't know. It had a metal cap on it which was secured in place by thick strips of rope. Looks clear to me, I said. I don't see anything inside of it. I shook it a little to see if anything would happen. Nothing. To be honest, it just looked like some prop you would see in a Hollywood movie. Something that looks really cool, but you'd never end up actually using. I'm gonna open this up and set this ghost free. Leon looked doubtful. What's the point? You don't believe in ghosts anyway, so just put it back and let's get out of here. I untied the rope, letting it fall to the ground. I unscrewed the metal cap and held my breath just before lifting it. Even I was nervous, the heat of the moment and all. I looked up and around, trying to see if anything happened. See, I said, this was nothing more than a hoax. Suddenly, it became deathly quiet. like a void had sucked up all the sound waves in the air. It was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Then I felt a presence in the room, not just Leon and myself, but something else, something sinister. I could tell by the way my heart sank, like the way it does in your nightmares. The next thing we heard was chilling, a coarse rustling from the floor below. Then, banging and tearing and ripping and cracking. It was enough to make us look at each other in alarm. "Shh, quiet," I said, putting my finger on my lip. Footsteps emerged from the sound. Someone was here. Heavy stomping against the weak wooden floorboards banged in our direction. They were headed up the stairs. Bang, bang, bang. We were petrified. We didn't know what to do. Like a strange silhouette emerging from the darkness of shadows, a figure appeared. It was 7 feet tall and as stiff and rigid as the crystal jar I was holding. It looked like Frankenstein's monster, covered in a variety of animal skin and leather. I couldn't even see a face on it because it was too covered in a grotesque patchwork of fur. Antlers hung loose on its head. It was as if someone had taken a mannequin and covered it head to toe in the skin of a dozen different animals just for kicks and giggles. We screamed. "What the hell?" Leon cried. The thing's arm creaked upwards, its movement stiff. Its mouth and eyes were torn from animal skin, and when it began to speak, I fell back in horror. It was a twisted, shattered voice, one straight from hell. "Choose sacrifice," it said. Its arm pointed between Leon and myself. As I struggled to find my own voice through the pain in my stomach, I realized I didn't just set a ghost free. It was a demon. It had to be. Last time I checked, ghosts didn't go around asking for sacrifices. I couldn't believe that the old lady was right all along. The place was evil, all right. "Choose sacrifice," it said again, this time taking a step forward. Leon was rooted in place, unable to move. There was a dusty old chair 10 feet away from me, and I inched myself towards it, keeping my eyes on the monster. Its head cracked towards Leon. He was closer, and it started moving towards him, reaching out its arms with hooves as hands. I sprinted into action. I grabbed the old chair and swung as hard as I could at the thing. Didn't take much force, and when the chair hit, the monster shattered into a dozen pieces. Its patchwork of pelts flew across the room. Its head thudded onto the floor and looked up at me like it would kill me if it could. Taking no time to hesitate, Leon and I ran down to the first floor and straight out of the house. "Run!" I yelled. Only after 5 minutes did we stop to catch our breath and look back down the street towards the old Trappers Museum. It didn't look like anything was following us. We were safe. "What was that thing?" Leon panted, his hands on his knees. "I don't know," I said. "I don't know if I want to know." "Why did you open that jar?" he asked, shaking his head. I wondered then, did I really set that thing free? Was there actually some entity trapped in that jar that I let loose? It sure looked like it. We walked the rest of the way back home in silence, shivering against the cold wind. The next day, I decided to place an anonymous phone call to the police of a burglary at the Trappers Museum, just to see what would happen. Well, it became a much bigger deal than I thought it would be. Once the police saw the weird symbols and blood and pelts, apparently a local journalist caught wind of it and decided to turn it into a local headline. When she published her piece, I was shocked by what I read. Apparently, the Fur Collective Outpost Museum had long-standing ties with the occult. In fact, the museum was actually shut down years ago because of controversies surrounding animal abuse and ritualistic animal sacrifice. Not just one or two, hundreds of them. Somehow those facts never made it into the news. Until now, our whole town was shocked and demanded answers. It wasn't long after that until it was discovered that the land and house had transferred ownership 10 years ago. The new owner just left the property there to collect dust, saying he had no clue about the history of the museum. In the end, he agreed to the city council's suggestion of demolishing the place, and that's what happened. One lazy afternoon when I went back there, the whole place was torn down. Good riddance. All I could hope for was that whatever evil entity Leon and I had seen there that night had long since returned to wherever it came from. I prayed long and hard that it did.